By 1944, the fight for civil rights and the fight for global freedom intersected violently in the skies above Italy and Germany. Men who had been forced to sue their own government just for the right to serve as aviation cadets were now strapping into high-performance fighters to defend it. The Tuskegee Airmen fought a grueling two-front war, overcoming systemic racism at home before ever engaging the Luftwaffe's finest interceptors. From harrowing strafing runs over the beaches of Anzio to massive bomber escort missions targeting Berlin, they demonstrated unmatched tactical discipline. During their tenure as escort fighters, they gained immense respect from vulnerable bomber crews who began specifically requesting the Red Tails for protection. Their flawless dedication helped dismantle the Axis war machine and laid the undeniable groundwork for the total desegregation of the military. This is their heroic story, in their own words.
As black pilots in World War II, we fought two wars, one against the Nazis overseas and one against racism at home.
They had it tough. They didn't get any help except from God and their own willpower.
I believe the Tuskegee Airmen were some of the most outstanding pilots who ever flew.
They used the Tuskegee Airmen as an experiment to see if blacks could fly. The answer we gave them was yes.
In the early days of aviation, when the excitement hit after Charles Lindbergh's exploits, blacks were left out of the aviation boom.
I never thought that I'd have the opportunity to fly because the industry, the people who did the training and all just were not open to us.
In that time period, in 1930, the general attitude was that blacks were not able to fly, and that is based upon the results of a 3-year study conducted by the United States Army War College.
We come to learn that the War Department had definitely said that it did not believe that a Negro had the agility, the dexterity, or the ability to operate something as complicated as an aircraft. Therefore, I had very little hope that I would become a military aviator.
Well, the civilian pilot training program, which began in the late 30s, was available at a number of colleges throughout the nation, including, I think it was about 6 predominantly black schools.
I think the administration saw that our aviation industry was falling way behind, both in commercial and military aviation. So they decided to initiate a program sponsored by the government. The objective would be to train 20,000 students a year.
When I found that I had been accepted for the civilian pilot training program first, I was just completely elated because others had gone before me. And I would go out to the field on the weekends and watch them fly. And I was just thrilled by what I saw them doing.
Tuskegee Institute at that time had become the outstanding school for that civilian pilot training program. I went through it. Chief Anderson, the father of black aviation, was our chief instructor.
It never really dawned on me or occurred to me that a white could fly because he's white and the black couldn't because he was black. I observed and found that they not only knew how to take instruction in flying, but they were very good, excellent pilots.
Without a doubt, that program demonstrated that that blacks could fly airplanes, and they could do it well as anybody.
And so that was one step toward the achievement of my dream and the dreams of a lot of other young men throughout the country whose first experience in flying was in the same program.
This was only a civilian
program. It did not preclude their entrance into the military. That was still a closed area for black youth up to the beginning of the war.
The black press took up the hue and cry and had a lot of articles demanding that the government accept applications from blacks.
The story was out. The War Department just turned out releases after releases saying that the blacks would never master combat. It furnished a good negative picture, so we stayed right on it because we were the only voice that these poor devils had. I remember I started one of my stories saying we're the only race in America that had to fight to get killed.
And therefore their whole thrust was trying to convince industry, corporate world, and the War Department that you've got all this manpower, and it just happened to be black.
We didn't get in the Army Air Corps because we pestered the military. No, we got in the Army Air Corps because other people, what we know as the black press and black politicians, which there were only a few in those days, kept bothering people to, let's just do it.
And it was only in 1941 that a student at Howard University by the name of Yancey Williams sued his government to be accepted as an aviation cadet. And you can imagine the embarrassment that our government must have endured having a citizen of its own country sue to be accepted in their military.
And the Air Force didn't wait for a court to rule. I can even tell you where I was driving when I heard that the Air Corps foreman was going to form a Black Eagle Squadron.
The United States Army decided that they would train black aviators, but of course none of the bases wanted them.
So they built us our own training base, separate but equal, in Tuskegee, Alabama.
This actually ended up to be probably the best thing that could have happened, because in developing the Tuskegee Airmen, they went to the colleges and recruited the most athletic, the most outstanding academically, the greatest leaders, the ones who were willing to try. So by getting an elite group of folk, it was almost assured that we'd be successful.
My first impression at arrival in Tuskegee was one of amazement and dismay.
In 1942 in Alabama, the Negro was a second-class citizen. No ifs, no ands, no buts.
Many of us had never been deep south before, and we really resented, and we're not exactly sure how to handle the rigid segregation where you were expected to step off the sidewalk if a white person passed, where you couldn't eat in restaurants, where you couldn't go to stores and so on.
We had the feeling of uneasiness anytime we were off the base in the South. Even the air that we breathed didn't seem to be free. It just kind of hit you in the bottom of the stomach, in the pit of the stomach, really. This is it. We're right in the heart of Dixie.
At Tuskegee, the goal was to train enough pilots to form the 99th Fighter Squadron, then called Pursuit Squadron, which would be an all-black unit from the commander to the cooks.
The 13 men of the first class, Class 42C, were inducted on July 19, 1941, and started their training. But this was not your typical flight training program.
The program at Tuskegee Army Airfield was often referred to as the experiment.
It was an experiment because as we were going through it, we felt that we were being programmed to fail.
And I think it might have been somewhere in the back of a lot of minds that they'll blow it, and then we can tell them for the next 200 years, well, we tried it and it didn't work. They did what we expect them to do. They failed.
Well, Tuskegee, as you know, was a very small black college town, and the blacks had no recourse to law and enforcement.
When we got off base and went into the town of Tuskegee, it was absolutely inescapable that Jim Crow was very much alive and was being very much enforced.
Therefore, it was a very strenuous time in all of our lives. And certainly you would believe that, well, I'm in uniform now, or I'm an officer. I have my wings, and therefore it ought to make a difference. But you very early on would come to learn that it did not make any difference. Boy, what are you doing with those wings on? You're no pilot. We don't have any Negro pilots. Are you an officer? When did they start making Negroes officers?
The first commander of the air base tried to bring the segregation of the town into the air base. Because of our protest, he was removed. He was an embarrassment. And he was replaced by a young white colonel by the name of Noel Parrish.
He walked in and he said, I want to tell you, I'm a pea-shelling redneck from the pea patches of Georgia. But we have a job to do here, and we're going to do it, aren't we? And I said, yes, sir.
He believed in what he was doing. He knew that there was no reason why any human being in good physical shape couldn't fly.
We admired and revered Colonel Parrish, who died as a brigadier general, to such an extent that we referred to him as our great white father.
We really loved the guy. We didn't know how much until much later after the war, and found out what he'd gone through to protect us. And he did that by, of course, making sure all the officers that trained us, white officers, treated us fairly, even though there may have been some prejudice on the part of some of these persons, but they volunteered first, so they knew what they were coming into.
Noel said that a lot of the instructors came from Maxwell Air Force Base, which was about 40 miles down the road. And he said, those guys wanted to come to Tuskegee because they loved instructing, because these guys wanted to learn.
They took a certain amount of pride in what they called their student. And there was that little competition always between the instructors as to whether their students soloed first, or their students had the best scores in gunnery, their students did the best in whatever the training phase was.
I was talking to the late Joe DiMaggio of New York Yankees, and Joe said, I know about the Tuskegee Airmen because one of my best friends was one of the instructor pilots at Tuskegee. So he said, you guys could really fly.
When the 99th was finally activated at Tuskegee in 1942, there was a West Point graduate in the first class by the name of Captain Benjamin O. Davis. At West Point, for 4 years, he was totally and completely ostracized. Nobody in his class spoke to him, only on official duty.
Noel appreciated what this young man had to have experienced emotionally and culturally to do what was ahead of him. And I remember Noel saying, if anything had ever happened to Davis, this whole program could have gone under.
And in spite of the fact that he didn't have any more combat experience or flying training than any of the other pilots in the 99th, the respect of him as a person and his character set him automatically as a leader that we would have followed anywhere, under any conditions.
Benjamin O. Davis gave us focus and respectability, but we also got help from a few other places.
Earlier, the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt had taken an interest in the program and even visited Tuskegee.
And while she was there, she saw a lot of airplanes flying around the campus, asked questions as to who's flying them. She was told, local men. She asked, you mean colored people? And she was told, well, yes.
The Secret Service were really upset, and they called the president, FDR, and I think they say he said, well, you know, Eleanor, he wasn't going to do anything. So Chief Anderson took her up and flew her around Tuskegee in the area and brought her back, and everything went fine. And she was sold on it, saying, you know, what's this thing, blacks can't fly? I mean, I think she felt it was all ridiculous in the first place.
Well, the context of Tuskegee was really one of breaking barriers, breaking the racial barriers, but all of us wanted to fly. All of us wanted to have that chance.
And the more we found out about the opposition and the intent of the program was to prove that we were failures, made us fight even harder.
I got the Tuskegee Army Airfield running, and you were busy about 12 hours a day. You had ground school, you had officer training, and you had flight training. Therefore, in that 5 months, I had one open post. That was Easter Sunday morning. They let us go to sunrise service.
We didn't pass up any opportunity to learn. We spent lots of hours with each other, studying and questioning each other and learning our subjects down pat.
They criticized me for not going to town for 6 months, but they didn't know I had planned to be in the top 25% of the class.
If we had failed, then there would have perhaps been some credibility to the notion that blacks cannot do anything requiring technical ability and courage and integrity. And we could not allow that to happen.
We finished up that training by September of '42 and passed the operational readiness inspection and were declared combat ready. And it was very rewarding to see a group of men that the government had said, and much of America had said, that they could not operate a complicated piece of equipment like the aircraft. Now the question was, can they fly and fight?
And there was quite a bit of controversy because several of the pilots had completed their flight training and they were not sent overseas. So there was this constant agitation that these pilots, why aren't they being used overseas?
The press and the black activists and all said, send those flyers to combat. But the War Department really didn't want us to get into that position.
There was no existing Air Force unit in Europe that wanted them attached to their combat unit.
The commanders in the Pacific, the commanders in Europe, neither one wanted us. As a matter of fact, the man at the very top of the Air Corps at that time, General Henry Hap Arnold, did not want us flying at all, didn't want us trained.
Denmark said, we don't want them in Denmark, we don't want them in Greenland or Iceland. And Great Britain was not keen about having us in the British Isles. The French said, send them. And that's how the 99th was deployed into North Africa.
The 99th Fighter Squadron was first assigned to 12th Air Force in the Mediterranean Theater of Operation.
And it was only Easter Sunday morning, 1943, we finally arrived at a little town in North Africa in French Morocco called Fez.
We were assigned to the 33rd Fighter Group, commanded by Colonel Spike Momire, who apparently did not want us at all. And that outfit played real mind games with us. The only briefing that we were given by the pilots of the 33rd, who had been somewhat seasoned, had experience in combat, was, y'all boys keep up.
We come to learn that we were going to be operating in a different mode, on a different mission from what normally a fighter squadron operated. And that was, we were not going to be up there at 8,000 or 10,000 feet with the British Spitz and American P-38s fighting the German 109 and 190s. But we were going to be doing what was called close tactical ground support.
Our first missions were against the island of Pantelleria, over which for about 2 weeks continually there was bombing by all types of aircraft, high altitude B-17s, middle altitude bombers and fighter bombers like ourselves. And we just bombed those Germans until they ultimately just surrendered.
There was an excitement, the first combat mission, and I could see anti-aircraft flak. These little puffs of black smoke, and it hit me. They're shooting at me. They're shooting at all of us. There are about 36 planes up there. But, you know, you felt that personally, that now you're in it. This is war.
And for me, it was a victory because that inner fear that I had as to how will I react was gone. I knew how I'd react. I was a tiger. I wasn't a pussycat.
And then when Charles Hall shot down the first ME-109 and a P-40, we knew the P-40 was not the top-of-the-line aircraft. But that also got the attention of the War Department.
But nevertheless, General Momeyer became very disillusioned with these pilots. And Noah was greatly concerned about that. And General Momeyer felt like all these guys are the pits.
The reports that came back to the headquarters of the War Department from Colonel Momeyer's group, who reported that we did not have flight discipline, that we couldn't be depended upon, and a lot of spurious reports that were not true. And so it was being contemplated, I've read, that the whole program be discontinued.
Colonel Davis was in the United States, having been recalled from Italy to handle the combat training for 3 new squadrons of black fighter pilots to be trained at Tuskegee, the 332nd Fighter Group.
And he appeared in a hearing in Washington, and he pointed out that here's a unit that's only had just a little over, in fact, at that time, not even a full year's of combat experience, and starting out fresh, that their performance really hadn't been given a fair test.
Fortunately, out of that hearing, they approved the 332nd going overseas, and they left the 99th there. It was a good thing, too, because the 99th was about to get the chance they needed.
Colonel Earl Bates of the 79th Fighter Group, this is an all-white fighter group, accepted us as American trained pilots, and he mixed us with his unit until we picked up all the know-how that we needed.
And he made it clear in the beginning that we had experiences and capabilities that his pilots could learn from, and they had experiences and capabilities that we could learn.
Being attached to the 79th gave the 99th the opportunity they needed to show what they could do in combat. The air units were sent up the coast of Italy to provide cover for the Allied landing on the beaches at Anzio.
Here we were at Anzio. For the first time, we had an opportunity to come eyeball to eyeball with German fighter pilots in the ME-109 and the FW-190. And of course, now is the test. Can they fire and can they fight?
I was leading the flight. I think I started out with 12 planes, and we were to fly at 12,000 feet, patrolling the Anzio beachhead. And there the Navy was landing these vessels, unloading a lot of cargo and troops and everything for the beachhead invasion.
The Germans now are becoming very, very concerned and fighting to the death to repel the invasion at Anzio. So the Luftwaffe came down to our level to protect their troops on the ground, on the beaches.
I heard this call on the radio, Red Fox leader. We have 23 bogeys. And you could see the guy's head just swiveling, and everybody's trying to spot him. And I spotted them, just little specks way up there at 23,000.
And in the first 2 weeks of operations over Anzio, the 99th shot down 17 aircraft, probably damaged another 8, and no more was a question valid. They could fly and they could fight.
It made them take notice, and the ridicule went away.
And that was really a turning point for it, because the guys were very aggressive. Everybody wanted to get a kill in. And, you know, they knew that they could do it. They were truly accepted as combat fighter pilots.
And this, to me, was the turning point on the general attitude of people in the military about the Negro as an individual and as a person. And it is on top of that we began to build, because by now 3 more squadrons had arrived overseas, the 100th, the 301st, and the 302nd. And this was a wonderful news for them to receive as they were debarking there in Italy, is what the 99th had done over Anzio.
As we were finishing training and getting ready to set sail for Europe, we in the 32nd heard about the success of the 99th over Anzio. And that was great news for us as we prepared to cross the Atlantic.
8 knots crossing the Atlantic. I tell everybody, when you got off the Liberty ship in Naples, you were ready to fight anybody after more than 3 weeks on the Liberty ship. After 2 or 3 weeks, we got brand new P-39 Qs. Brand new airplane, but still not very much of an airplane.
Well, in the P-39, we did harbor patrol and strafing and running up and down the peninsula and things like that. It was not, as far as I was concerned, not a very important job. It was important to the service, but we would never see combat that way.
We only had 2 or 3 occasions during patrol that our pilots were even able to get close enough to try a shot. We did not shoot down any aircraft, but the Germans weren't putting up that many.
I was sick and tired of flying the P-39 in coastal patrol, 4 and 5 missions a day, plus you sat in the airplane on a 2 or 3 minute alert in the airplane every day. And I said, I wanted to go somewhere and fly once per day, I don't care how long.
But then Colonel Davis was approached by Ira Eaker, the commander of the 15th Air Force, who was losing his bombers at a terrible rate.
He was looking for a group of fighter pilots to escort his bombers to the targets and to bring them back safely.
Colonel Davis realized that strategic flying and the protection of our bombers to reduce the losses they were suffering from flying deep into enemy territory was really one of the top missions that the Air Force was in being for.
We felt that was the day. We went from 12th Air Force to 15th, and that was really an important day in our lives.
General Twining was commanding general of the 15th Air Force. He had 4 wings of B-24s and 1 wing of B-17s. He told General Davis to make sure you brief your pilots, do not run away and leave the bombers. And I assume he suspected that some of his fighter pilots were doing just that.
Many of the other groups shot down the planes at the expense of the bomber. So they would put decoys out here, they would leave, and as they would leave escorting the bombers, the ME-109s and the FWs would come right through the bomber stream, right through the stream, and pick off a few and then head on home.
General Davis briefed us, and he's a pretty tough commander, as you know. And if he caught anybody doing anything other, he'd really stick it to him.
Colonel Davis, our commander, said that we couldn't afford to have any mistakes. We couldn't afford to leave bombers and have them shot up, because it would be looked at differently when we did it than it was when anyone else does it.
Well, escorting the bombers was going to be a big task, and we got just the right plane for the job.
We switched over to the P-51 Mustangs. Some of us flew the airplane without reading the pilot's handbook, but when you're flying almost every day, it really doesn't matter too much.
They took me down to the flight line, said, here's P-51, here's the manual, but here's the way it works. So after half an hour, I was in the cockpit.
Now this was a gem. This was the apple of the whole fleet. We wanted that, and we got it. And we felt that we were at the top of the heap now, finally at the top of the heap.
And I began then to feel that maybe the government wasn't such a bunch of thugs. It said something about what the government expected of us and what they would do to see that we were successful.
Well, we flew from southern Italy down below the Foggia area into southern Germany, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Yugoslavia, northern Italy. So we covered quite a bit of ground. Some of the missions were better than 8 hours, a lot of them, in fact. We're after almost anything. We're after airfields to destroy Me-262s. We're after oil refineries. We were after heavy industrial targets.
It was a great experience to form up as we formed up, head across the Adriatic and the Balkan countries, and meet up with the bomber stream at rendezvous point.
We were allowed a very short time to make rendezvous, way less than 3 minutes from our takeoff time until we saw the bombers. And there was strict reprisals against being late because the bombers were then vulnerable, you see. But we made it every time, and they were glad to see us.
You have to realize that a bomber stream could run for an hour, one squadron after another. And on every one of those birds, B-17, B-24, there was 10 or 11 people. And they deserve some help.
10 or 12 people on every bomber. So every time you lost a bomber, 10 or 12 families were bereft of a brother, a husband, a cousin, an uncle.
We'd have 64 planes protecting these bombers. And we flew about, 50 to 100 feet, maybe 100 feet over the bombers, reasonably close, so that we had an umbrella which would protect the bombers against the Me-109s, the FWs coming down through the center.
Now, we couldn't do anything about the anti-aircraft fire. The 88s tore them up, and they were lumbering along at 165 at about 25,000 feet and soaking up all this flak.
All these puffs of black smoke and orange burst, it's so thick you could walk on it. You wonder what would happen to the bombers. Would they be able to make it? Because as you were escorting the bombers, you would make a circle around the target and pick them up when they came off the target.
And we felt sorry for them. So we determined that protecting them from enemy aircraft was our job, and we were not going to lose any to that.
Of course, we didn't want to lose our fighters to our own bombers either.
And it's important for a fighter to be easily identified by the bombers because they would shoot you. All their beady eyes would just focus on anything that looked like a fighter airplane.
P-51 doesn't look a whole lot different than an Me-109, for instance. So for the gunners on the bombers, the units began to identify themselves.
We painted the empennage, which is the tail section of the P-51s, and we were known as the Red Tails.
We had these Tuskegee Red Tail planes flying escort for us, and because of the gear that these men wear, we all wear, you can't tell who's behind the goggles.
There was occasion where damaged bomber had to land at the nearest strip and ended up landing at Remetelic.
And when we landed, we didn't know where we were. We thought we could have been on a German strip. But one thing that we did know is all these black troops drove up in American uniforms.
And we greeted them because we are good people.
But we didn't know that these red tails were black airmen. So the biggest surprise we had was to find out that there were black pilots flying escort for us. In other words, during World War II, and I had been in service almost 20 months at that time, I didn't know there was a black Air Force. That's how strong the segregation was.
And I'm sure, looking back on the times, there would have been a lot of consternation had they known that we were blacks.
But they flew a large number of escort missions for the white pilots of the 15th. They flew into Austria, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, and even into Germany.
One of the most important and most dangerous missions was the long flight to Berlin, and that was on March 24th, 1945.
But Major Gleed called me that night on the 23rd of March and says, we have a max effort mission tomorrow and we need big tanks. Normally we carried a 75-gallon tank on each wing. The big tank meant a 110-gallon tank.
We didn't have any big tanks on our base at the time, but luckily we had heard several were in the process of being transported by train. So we sent some ground personnel out to meet it.
They caught up with the train, they held up the train, they called it the Great Train Robbery.
Those guys worked around the clock to get the tanks fitted and those planes ready for the mission.
And at 8 o'clock the next morning, they had approximately 60 P-51 Mustangs re-equipped with 110-gallon tanks to go on this max effort mission, and that turned out to be the Berlin mission.
Our objective was a tank factory in Berlin. We took off knowing that the 1,600-mile round trip into Germany would be the longest ever flown by the fighters of the 15th Air Force, and that almost all of the mission would be flown behind enemy lines.
We were assigned to escort B-17s to the target, or to the intercept point. We were supposed to be relieved by another fighter group. And when we got to the point where we were to be relieved, they were not there. We were going deep into Germany. So we were ordered to continue to escort the bombers.
600 miles from home base, we took them the other 200 miles up to the IP southwest of Berlin. But we had lots of fuel. We elected to remain with the bombers and offer them cover over the most heavily defended target in Germany, Berlin. And in doing so, we spent 30 minutes over Berlin. We shot down 3 Me-262s.
And as we were crossing this bomber stream, out of my eye on the left side, 9 o'clock, I saw these little darts. Because I had seen these Me-262s on some missions where I was escorting photo reconnaissance planes, I knew what they were immediately. And as they came in toward the bomber stream to attack, they were just getting their speed up. I said to my group, drop your tanks, your extra fuel tank, and follow me. And as I made a hard right, I caught this jet just coming in to get ready to blow up the bombers. And I hit him midstream, he blew up, he ejected, and that was victory number 1.
The 332nd ended up shooting down 3 Me-262s on that mission to Berlin, and the group was rewarded with the Presidential Unit Citation.
Generally in the group briefing in the morning, they would critique yesterday's mission. Which bomb group hit what target, who was the escort, and how many did they lose to ground fire, or how many did they lose to enemy fighters. I don't think it would take a genius very long to figure out that the Red Tails were not losing any aircraft.
And after they found out that we weren't losing their bombers to enemy fighters, we became a kind of a favorite. We were kind of a life insurance policy, as a matter of fact.
Because Colonel Davis insisted on us having very rigorous discipline and not leaving the bombers to chase the enemy, we protected the bombers to such an extent that during our period of escort, we never lost one bomber to enemy fighters. So much so that the bomber crews, many of whom were from the South, wanted the Red Tails.
The success of the fighter pilots of the 332nd and the 99th before them had turned some heads. Now the United States government looked to train blacks as bomber pilots.
You know, while we were overseas, there was a formation of a bomber group called the 477th Bomber Group. They would have fly medium bombers, Mitchell B-25s, and they were destined to go to the South Pacific. At Godman Field, we had a base commander who was a tyrant. He hated blacks with a passion.
Well, Colonel Selway was a horse's ass. He didn't take us seriously. He didn't take us seriously.
It was determined that we would not succeed. He kept these guys in training forever, it seemed.
He was a pretty bad egg by all accounts. He was a segregationist of the highest order, and he did everything he could to, I call it almost to the point of demonizing, the so-called uprising of blacks. He just wanted to keep them in their place, so to speak.
When the unit was transferred to Freeman Field in Indiana, the commanding officers continued to agitate the black airmen in a number of ways, foremost of which was keeping black officers out of the so-called White Officers Club.
There was a lot of malcontent, believe me, and it kept growing inside until some guys just decided, hey, we're not taking it. And so they said, hey, we're going to march on the White Officers Club, and that's it. Whatever happens is going to happen, you know.
We said, now don't argue, don't fuss, just go there and get arrested, you know, if they won't let you in. And I got there, and the guy said, can't come in. I said, well, why can't we come in? He said, well, you're trainees. I said, well, no. He said, you have to belong to the base squadron. I said, well, I belong to the base squadron, and I took my card out. He said, well, we don't let niggers in. And with that, I went by him.
You have to remember at the time that they did this, that they were in defiance of regulations that could have brought a death sentence to them by disobeying their commanding officer during war times.
Not only did they have to struggle with the arrests and the fallout from their protests, but the unrest probably cost them a chance to prove what they could do overseas.
And there was no reason to say that we wouldn't be worthy combatants. After all, we were the best trained B-25 group in the country.
But they were never deployed because VJ Day happened, and they never left the States on a combat deployment.
The 99th proved their abilities to fight by facing a foreign enemy. The 477th, which never got into combat, proved their worth by confronting a domestic enemy, by confronting segregation and discrimination at home, and winning.
The 477th might not have had the opportunity to go to battle, but for those of us who did, our return home was far less than we had hoped for.
When I got to Boston, which was the cradle of the revolution, we got off the ship, and coming down the gangplank, there were two tremendous signs, white signs with black start writing on them. On the right it said, Negro personnel over this side, and on the other sign it said, white personnel. They split us right back down on the bottom of the gangplank. And I felt a bitterness well up in me that I had never felt before.
I had ribbons, looked like a Christmas tree. I flew 169 combat missions. That was a pretty good deal. I thought I was paying my dues. I had done everything that my government could ask any American male to do for his country. And I thought, truthfully, in the back of my mind, and I think in the back of a lot of our minds, was that, okay, we've proven ourselves, when we go back there, say, well done, fellas, and as a result of this, things have changed. And to come back and find out they hadn't changed one iota, to me was rather disappointing. Not rather, it was darn disappointing.
But I got back to Camp Patrick Henry in Virginia. There were German prisoners on the post. I was denied access to the officers' club. Being a captain with my DFC, I had a soldier's medal for pulling the pilot out of a burning aircraft, and several air medals.
Now, this is the enemy in our country on a military base that we American citizens who had been fighting them for our country couldn't do certain things. And I became incensed and outraged.
We were aware that the reports of the commanders going back, and of course all the higher level commanders were white, were couched in mediocre terms.
We were proud examples of what we had accomplished, and that was not tolerable to those people who didn't want us there in the first place.
Not only was our service to our country underappreciated by the military, but it did not seem to count for much to many other Americans either.
I went to the Eastern Airlines office on Fifth Avenue to fill out an application to be an airline pilot. As I was leaving, I remembered I had left my newspaper, and I went back to get it, and the secretary was crumbling it up, my application, and throwing it in the wastebasket. Her face turned as red as a beet, and she said, "I'm sorry, we don't hire Negroes here." That was the experience of airman after airman after airman.
But their refusal to take these setbacks lying down and the constant pressure of the black community upon the Truman administration took its toll.
And it was through their actions that we got some positive action. And President Truman says, hey, look, we can't have this two-part military force anymore. It's too ineffective, too expensive, and we don't need that kind of thing. It's one nation, and we're going to fight as one nation. So he passed Executive Order 9981, saying there would be no further discrimination in the armed forces.
We were really elated, believe me. We felt that that recognized the work we'd done, particularly the 477 guys here at the home front, that what we did was right, in other words.
So not only did the work of the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II help to bring down the walls of segregation in the U.S. military, it also opened up new possibilities for future generations of black Americans.
From 195 miles over Hawaii, welcome to Atlantis, STS-44. This is Commander Fred Gregory.
How are you all doing? I'm Fred Gregory, the commander of STS-44.
I was selected for the astronaut program in 1978, and though I was not the first black to fly on the space shuttle, I was the first black to pilot the space shuttle and the first to command the space shuttle. While I was with NASA, there was an application process for the space shuttle program, and I was debating whether I should apply or not. And I had a call from a friend of mine who was a friend of my parents, who suggested that I apply for the program for himself and for the Tuskegee Airmen. And I asked him, what are the Tuskegee Airmen? And General Davis then told me about the Tuskegee Airmen, what their history was. He told me about the experiment, the great tradition. And if I had some doubt about applying for the program, the doubt was wiped out immediately.
I am a pilot with United Airlines. I am an A320 captain. The Tuskegee Airmen made it possible for me to be an airline pilot. There's no doubt in my mind if they hadn't been there before me, and if they hadn't fought the battle first, then I would have been fighting the battle myself, and in a lifetime it would have been very unlikely that I would have been able to fight the battle plus achieve the rank of being a professional airline pilot.
We've taken great pride in our ability to lend a hand to the success of today's black youth, and we've also enjoyed the acknowledgments that have recently come forth for the work that we did for our country.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, accompanied by Secretary William Cohen, Lieutenant General Benjamin Davis Jr., Colonel William Campbell.
I'd like to say something personal. A lot of these old-fashioned, almost amazing arguments against the capacity of black Americans were still very much in vogue during the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. And for children like me who were taught that the civil rights movement was the right thing to do in the South, and who engaged in countless arguments against inane statements. The one stopper that any Southerner had in a civil rights argument was the Tuskegee Airmen. They will never know how much it meant.
Attention to orders. By direction of the President of the United States, the following named officer is advanced on the United States Air Force retired list to the grade of General. Lieutenant General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., United States Air Force, retired.
I was honored and privileged to be there when President Clinton pinned that 4th star on General Davis. He received the 4th star, but I might say we received the 4th star. And so it was a sort of a vindication for all that we had gone through for him to receive that rank. So his getting that 4th star meant that we were elevated as a unit, as a group of Americans who had until then not really been recognized for what we'd done.
I think we led in an idea of changing the country to accepting civil rights and accepting black people, African Americans, as people rather than as caricatures.
The success of the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II and the success of Jackie Robinson entering baseball in 1947 were really the bedrocks on which the civil rights movement was based, because it showed the white community that blacks had the courage, the ability to do it, and it emboldened the black community to stand up for their rights.
So long before Martin Luther King took to the streets with his peaceful movement, I think the Tuskegee Airmen had already found that peaceful resentment and excellence in their conduct and attitude would do more to try to overcome than it would be to become resentful and violent against it.
We have proven that people should be measured on their ability and their character, and that the strengths of our country are in all of its people.
And some 50-odd years later, we feel that we have overcome. The sadness is that we had to go through this, but trial and travail makes everyone stronger, and hopefully it has made this country stronger.
Failure was just not an option. And that's not only because of ourselves involved in our immediate family, but for all these unborn black kids, boys and girls, whose future depended to a large extent on what we did or did not do.
We felt that if we defended the country and defended it with valor, that the country would recognize that we were first-class citizens and would not continue to discriminate against us.
I know no other country. I was born and raised here. My father was born and raised here. His father. The fact that some white people didn't want it to be my country or felt it was their country and not mine meant not a dime to me. It didn't mean anything.
When we were fighting during the war, dealing with all of the racism and prejudice, we never thought we'd see the day when the Tuskegee Airmen would be honored at Arlington Cemetery, our nation's cemetery.
In spite of her imperfections, we love America as anybody else loves America. We just had to carry a heavier burden and a double load and fight for the opportunity to defend this democracy.
And that really is the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. We overcame those prejudices. We were able to subjugate our fears and our anger and turn it into productive activity so much so that we are probably the best recognized fighter group of World War II.
Every aircraft has a story that deserves to be told. Don't let these legends fade into the past. Like this video and subscribe to our channel and help us keep aviation history alive.